Good morning, 8th graders. We are going to start a lesson today. Let me go ahead and get the screen share ready for you. What I need you to do is you're going to open this assignment in Canvas. It's called Dog Conservationist and Invasive Species. And then just quickly click on the link, Dog Conservationist and Invasive Species lesson.doc. I forgot to turn off my phone. Give me a second. Okay, so the title for this is Dog Conservationist and Invasive Species. It says, last week we learned how cat breeders are profiting from selling cats that produce lower than average FeLD1, a protein that causes allergies. In addition, Purina makes a cat food that contains antibodies that make allergens difficult for humans to detect. You might have realized that science can be used in the business world. This week, we will learn how dogs are used in conservation. Among other things, the dogs detect invasive species, which are organisms that do not belong to a region, but were brought in by human activities. Invasive species can have negative environmental and economic impacts upon ecosystems. So our objective for today's lesson is to evaluate competing design solutions for maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem services. We're going to start by reading this article from Science News for Students and answering the questions on the link that follows. Okay, so make sure that you have both of those open and ready to work on. Hear the reading and hear the questions, both open. So I'm going to start reading, and then I would suggest that you read along as I'm reading to you, and then I may continue reading through the entire article, or if not, you'll need to finish the article on your own. Before we answer the questions, I meant before we begin reading, there are a couple questions that you're supposed to answer before reading. So first of all, just tell us what you know. How are dogs trained, and what are some of the things that dogs can be trained to do, for number one? And the second question under before reading says, imagine that you want to find a rare antelope in Central Asia. What are 3 signs that such an animal might have been in the area where you were searching? So just think about those, answer those questions. If you need to pause the video for a second, go ahead and do that. So conservation is going to the dogs. Kayla Fratt greets a driver as he hauls his boat toward one of 3 boat ramps in Wyoming's Yellowstone National Park. Can my dog check your boat, she asks. He's looking for zebra mussels. The driver, curious, agrees. He and his family climb out of the car, asking Fratt questions as Barley, a border collie, goes to work. Barley sniffs his way around the boat while Fratt tells the family about zebra mussels. Native to Russia and Ukraine, the mussels have cropped up in lakes around the world. They're small. Adults are usually the size of a fingernail, but they reproduce in massive numbers, clinging to and gumming up drainage pipes, power plants, waterways, and more. Zebra mussels eat the algae that native mussels and other aquatic animals need to survive. Without food, the native species die off. Meanwhile, the zebra mussels continue to spread. They're what scientists call an invasive species. So I happen to have already looked at the questions on the other page, and I know that this part is related to one of the questions. So I think it's okay for you in this case to just copy and paste the answers when you find them. So you can push Control C and then go to the questions. You will need to copy all these questions into a Google Doc, and then you can put your answer to, during the reading, why are people worried about zebra mussels showing up in the waterways, which I just highlighted here. I would like for you to write your answers in a different colored font. So for example, here's what I wrote for the question. Number 1, I wrote zebra mussels clog up drainage pipes, clogging them. Well, that's repetitive. I should take that out. And eat algae, thereby competing with native mussels. Okay, so there were a couple things I mentioned there. Notice I wrote in kind of an olive green color in italics. You should use a different color than the black text of the questions to answer. Okay, the next paragraph. It says the only way to fight these mussels is to stop their tiny larvae from hitching a ride to new places. But those larvae, about as big as the width of 2 human hairs laid side by side, are tough to spot. They get into tiny crevices of boats and motors, hiding until they reach a new lake. There they float free, starting a new infestation. Barley's tail starts a slow, sweeping wag. He closes his mouth and sniffs more intently. He senses something. Then he locates it. He lies down with his nose pointing to the spot. Frat inspects the area closely and pulls out a hidden vial. The vial contains zebra mussels. She had planted it on the boat while Barley was working. It's a super big deal and fortunately rare to find zebra mussels during a boat inspection, Frat says. The vial will help keep Barley's nose homed into the target scent. Frat pulls a squeaky ball from a bag and throws it to the dog for a vigorous round of play. So what they're showing here is that these dogs are trained to find certain things, like in this case, the zebra mussels, and then the dogs get rewarded by getting to play a game with the ball. Before we go on, I just want to see what this next question says. It's related to that. It says, what is a ball crazy dog and why do these dogs make great detection dogs? Let's read on and see if we can answer that question. It says in the next paragraph right here, Frat and Barley are key members of Working Dogs for Conservation, or WD4C. The Montana-based organization trains dogs to help with conservation projects. These programs include searching for invasive species like the zebra mussels and tracking rare and endangered animals. Some WD4C dogs live in Africa, where they help park rangers fight wildlife poaching, the illegal killing of wild animals. These dogs aren't ordinary pets. Some start out as service or military dogs and didn't do well in those lines of work. Most detection dogs did start off as pets, Frat says, but they're ball crazy and full of energy, and that can be too much for some owners to handle. The dogs tend to end up in the shelter a lot, she says. The reason? Because they're so high energy and go, go, go. The boundless energy often isn't a good fit for pet owners, Frat says, but it's ideal for a detection dog. A ball is the perfect reward. It's easy for the person who works with the dogs, its handler, to carry. A ball can't spoil away food treats might, and ball crazy dogs will do almost anything to get that reward. That makes them easy to train. These dogs learn that when they smell a certain scent, they get to play with their ball. Each dog is trained to detect specific odors. It might be those zebra mussels, or it could be the poop from a certain species of animal, or the animal itself. It might even be plants or plant parts. All are organisms that can be easy for people to miss without some help. So you can go back and answer that question. Fighting a plant invasion. On a recent day in Iowa, 2 WD4C dogs, Utah and Lily, are working with biologist Amy Hurt. Hurt helped create WD4C and directs their special projects. Noses raised to catch the wind, the dogs dash across the tall grass prairie. They are snaking back and forth in search of the scent that will get them their ball. It's hard work on a hot day. They take turns hunting for their target, Chinese bush clover. This invasive species releases chemicals that prevent other plants from growing, and it takes over native landscapes from the eastern United States. It looks a lot like round-headed bush clover, a close relative that's native to the United States. Even for people who are trained to tell the difference, it's easy to miss these shorter plants in the sea of tall grasses. All right, let's go back to the questions. I can see here that this question says, what is Chinese bush clover? You should be able to answer that. Remember, you can always pause the video if you need some time. Each time a dog finds a patch of Chinese bush clover, it lets her know. She marks the patch with a flag and takes careful notes. Someone else will return later to remove the invaders. Utah and Lily are an essential tool in the fight against invasive plants. Their super sensitive sniffers pick up odors that people can't detect. What's more, they are able to tell scents apart, even ones that are quite similar. Those two types of bush clover, for instance. Other dogs trained to find scat can tell droppings from diseased deer from those of healthy deer, or one type of bear from another. Some dogs can even identify scat from one individual animal. So obviously, or maybe not so obviously, scat is the feces or poop from different animals. Scent detection dogs aren't new to the world of conservation. Samuel Wasser first put dogs to use in his research in 1997. Wasser is a conservation biologist at the University of Washington in Seattle. He had studied animals the world over using only scat: baboons, bears, elephants, sea lions, owls, caribou, and more. Wasser discovered that he could get DNA, hormones, toxins, and other information out of scat. By studying those bits of dung, he can find and follow an entire population of animals without ever seeing one individual. And I happen to know that this right here is related to that next question, I think. So up here in your questions, you'll see what kind of information can Samuel Wasser get from animals' poop? And the next question is also related to his work, but about orcas. So let's see what we can learn about orcas. Wasser directs the university's Center for Conservation Biology. At one point, the center had 21 detection dogs working on projects. It became hard to manage all those dogs and projects, Wasser says. So the program shrank to 5 dogs. This helped to better focus on key projects at his center. Many of the original dogs got old and retired from detection work to live with their handlers. Some dogs now working at the center are trained to detect scat from orcas, killer whales. Sitting at the bow of a boat, they sniff the air blown toward them from a pod of orcas. When a whale poops, the dog leans in that direction, telling the boat driver where to go. You see the picture here? Researchers can then scoop the goopy poop into a plastic container and take it back to the lab for study. Let's see, what did the question say? It says, what did Samuel Wasser learn about orcas? Okay, we haven't answered that yet, I think. This work has led researchers to conclude that orcas that live off the coast of Washington are on their way out. One big reason is hunger. Human activity has reduced the number of Chinook salmon, which is the favorite food of these orcas. Pollution is another problem. Pollutants get into the whales' bodies where they're stored in fat. When the orcas go hungry, they burn that fat, releasing toxic chemicals into the blood where they can now harm the whales. So that is related to that last question that you should answer. Going on to the next paragraph. Other dogs working with the center are tracking wolves and their prey. Wolves are becoming more common in central Washington. Researchers want to know how their presence might be affecting other predators in the area. The dogs on this project are trained to find scat from carnivores, wolves, coyotes, cougars, bobcats, and black bears. In 4 6-week sessions, the dog found 8,000 piles of poop, most of which would have been missed by people relying strictly on sight. We know where we found the scat, Wasser says, and from the poop we get DNA telling us who pooped and what they were eating. This lets the team see how the various carnivores are moving around, and that's leading to insights about how competition with wolves is changing the diet of those other carnivores, says Wasser. Dog sampling is fantastic for that. Okay, looking at the questions, we have not yet gotten to the next topic, but it's going to be about finding evidence in Argentina. Not for everyone. Give me a second. Detection dogs can be incredibly useful to conservation and biologists, but not every dog and not every handler is cut out for the job. Fratt and Wasser agree that high-energy, ball-crazy rescue dogs make great detection dogs. It can be a win all around, especially when homeless dogs find a home and purpose helping wildlife. However, not all of those dogs work for every project, cautions Karen DeMatteo. She's a conservation biologist at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Choosing well can mean the difference between a successful project and one that fails. In Argentina, De Matteo's Chesapeake Bay Retriever Train helped her find scat from jaguars, ocelots, pumas, bush dogs, and small spotted cats called oncillas. Tracing their movements by tracking scat, her research team is now working to create protected areas between farms and communities. Train was perfect for this job because his thick coat protected him from plants with spines and prickles. His medium size let him clamber over some obstacles, such as fallen logs, and burrow under others, and his solid paws gave him good traction on the uneven ground. A dog's height, coat, and paws are important things to consider when choosing a dog for a project, De Matteo says. Searches in tall vegetation need tall dogs. Short dogs have to work too hard just to break through the brush, she says. They'll wear out too quickly. If the area is thorny, then dogs with longer fur will be better protected. But if there are a lot of ticks or burrs, that long fur would become a problem, and shorter-haired dogs should be used instead. Even the shape of the foot matters, she notes. Narrow feet will sink in mud or sand. Wide feet that splay out to support the dog's weight are better in those situations. All right, so we probably covered a couple questions here. Here it talks about the animals that they were supposed to find in Argentina, and then why was Train perfect for the Argentinian job. It says here, proper training is critical to a successful project, and Mateos notes. If the samples used to train dogs are too limited, the dogs will be more likely to make mistakes in the field. All scat from a certain species of animals, for instance, won't smell exactly the same. Think about how yours might smell differently after different meals. If too few samples are used in training, dogs might end up looking only for females, for example, instead of including males too, or only flowers in bloom instead of that plant has gone out to seed. So it's important to expose dogs to a variety of samples, and that will help them narrow down what they're looking for. Here we are. They're able to ignore odors that might have come from how the samples were collected or stored, and if there are other species that eat the same foods, it's important to include those when training the dog, De Matteo says. Otherwise, the dog may locate samples that you are not looking for, she says. For example, it may find both coyote and wolf scat when you only want wolves. Just as important as the dog in training is the handler. Handlers need to be able to have both physical and mental endurance. All right, I'm going to have you guys continue reading here. and answering the questions on your own, only because it's getting hard for me to keep reading, getting tired. So we're going to go back to here. I'm going to share another screen with you, which is the Word document that we're going to be working on. I think I already referred to it and didn't have it up there, but I think it's this one. So once you're done reading and answering those questions, the next thing I need you to do is look at this part of the assignment. It says instructions for the rest of the assignment. It says after reading and answering the related questions, which we started to do there and you finished on your own time, I want you to research 3 invasive species of Florida and complete the chart below and add it to the bottom of the questions for part of this week's assignment. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to model this activity for you. I'm going to give you an example. Please don't use my example. If you use my example, you're not going to get credit for it. But you're going to find 3 invasive species and do just what I'm doing for this specific one, okay? So I'm going to look up the iguana because I happen to know that the iguana is an invasive species of South Florida. I'm going to learn how it was originally transported to the United States. I'm going to learn its impact to ecosystem organisms and our human response to this invasion. And finally, I'm going to evaluate how I feel the human response has been to the iguana. So what I would do first is I just write the name of the species here. Remember, you don't get to do the iguana because I'm doing the iguana. And then I'm going to look up how it is transported. So let me get back onto the internet here. And this is what I expect you to do. You're just going to look up this information. How was the iguana introduced to Florida? I think, you know, before even looking, I know that pet owners had the iguanas and then they released them into the wild, or maybe they just escaped. So I'm guessing that's what I'm going to find here. And actually right here it says they were brought to Florida as pets or inadvertently on ships, which means that they just got here on ships without us. So probably both ways. Here it also says mostly through the pet trade. So it's really easy. I mean, the answer is there already. So I'm going to go back to the Word document. And that's what I'll write in the chart. Ooh, it didn't stay, but iguana, how it was transported. It was transported by the pet trade and or through boats from foreign places. Okay, and then impact to the ecosystem. Let's figure this one out. How has the invasive iguana impacted Florida? You can use different search terms, but this is, it says the Wildlife Conservation Commission said that the invasive iguanas are wreaking havoc to the ecosystem. Some green iguanas cause damage to infrastructure by digging burrows that erode and collapse sidewalks, foundations, seawalls, berms, and canals. Let's see what else. Let's try to find a good resource. I think this is the Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission. This should have a good, reliable information. It says Besides that, captive held iguanas are regulated as Class 3 wildlife. A permit is not required to possess green iguanas. Talks about their description, their diet, their native range, Florida distribution, and impacts. This is what we're interested in. So the impacts include those upon residential and commercial landscape vegetation, the infrastructure, the burrowing that I mentioned. They also leave droppings. Oh, well, we can deal with droppings. That's not, that's gross. Inside swimming pools, yuck. They might be a threat to tree snails, and it says they've consumed nickerbean, which is a host plant of the endangered Miami blue butterfly, which that could endanger the host plant for the butterfly. And they transmit the infectious bacterium Salmonella to humans through contact with water or surfaces contaminated by their feces. Okay, so I would suggest trying to list as many of these as you can in your chart. So how is it transported? We said that was transported. Oh, I already filled that in. I'm not going to do it again. But so the impact to the ecosystem transmits feces. I'm sorry, transmits Salmonella through its species, destroys infrastructure, vegetation. That's enough. All right, and human response to invasion. The human response to the invasion, let's see what we're trying to do to stop them. I'm gonna look without maybe taking you there. Human response to iguanas in Florida. Let's see if that's enough. It says we're urged to kill them whenever possible. I've heard they taste like chicken. They might make a good dinner. Doesn't sound very humane killing iguanas. I don't know if I'd want to do that, but let's see what else it says here. Excuse me. It also says here that the State Wildlife Commission same thing, that they're just allowing us to kill iguanas now. It says you do not need a permit to kill them on your own property at any time of the year. How do you feel about that? I don't know if I feel so great, but all right, so that's what I would put in that box. And then if I could find something more, that would be great. But you're getting the idea. For the last column, I would put my evaluation of human response with a 1 to 4, where 4 equals a response that eliminates the invasive species best. I don't really know how great this is. I mean, first of all, I don't agree with maybe the method, although it could become an important food source for South Floridians, but that's not what I'm evaluating. I'm just evaluating whether killing them would eliminate the invasive species. And yes, it would, but how many homeowners are going to go out and kill their iguanas in their yard? So it's hard for me to evaluate that. I'm going to say that instead of putting a number response here, I'm going to write a written response. Well, maybe I should do both. I'll say that my response is a 1. and I'll say why. I do not think you should support your number 2, please. I do not think that most homeowners would kill iguanas found on their property. So that's my opinion. If you can find substantiated support, in other words, find support within a document that you are researching, that would be a lot better. So I hope this gives you an idea as to the assignment. So for your final submission, what I expect is all of the questions and answers to the reading, as well as the chart. You can put them both into a Google Doc and then submit them to the assignment. I feel like we've had a pretty short video conference today, but I don't feel like the assignment's that difficult, and I think that pretty much concludes our work for today. Let me just go back to that Word document for a second, because I want to go back to the objective for the day. So our objective was to evaluate competing design solutions for maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem services. In this case, the design solutions for maintaining biodiversity, in the example of the iguana, was killing the iguana. So killing an iguana should lead to increased biodiversity because the iguanas are competing for food sources with native species that actually belong in Florida. And they're also acting probably as predators on some organisms, as we read about the snails on that one document. So we have done the evaluation as shown here. If you have any questions about the assignment, I encourage you to email me, and I look forward to seeing you in future meetings. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day.